So I have got some slides and I'm going to share. But before I do that, I just want to because Celia is new to this, and Jenny knows us very well, but Celia is new. I just want to explain a little bit about the School of Humankind. So Angela is our co-director along with a chap called John Britton. And we have people in Europe, UK, US, Canada. Actually, do you have anybody? I don't have anyone in the US, but we definitely have people in Canada. And it's about supporting human beings in the difficult business of being human and aiming for a fucking glorious life, which is kind of a catchphrase we have. So we do two sessions a week, pretty much, Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have these free community events covering all sorts of topics. There's one on Tuesday on finances. So this month, the focus this month was anxiety, which is why I am talking about anxiety in relationships. So I'm going to share my slides. So can you see the slide?
No.
No.
Oh, yeah, it's just a bit
Yeah.
of delay on it.
Okay. So the reason I called this what I called it is because I know that in quite a lot of people I work with, they allow their anxiety to take control of their relationships. And it's never good for a relationship if your anxiety is running the show. So what I'm going to talk about in the next, 40 minutes? If my laptop will take me to the next slide, which it will not. Here we go. I'm going to talk a little bit about why this topic, the problem of anxiety getting the upper hand or taking the steering wheel, if you like, a kind of a natural history of anxiety and some of the mistakes that we make coping with anxiety, how to transform it, and action that people can take straight away, like as soon as you finish the call, as it were. I talk a little bit about my Heartbridge method and about how people can work with me. And then there'll be time for questions at the end. So why me? I've been working with people with mental health problems for about 18 years now. I have to keep updating it, including PTSD and complex PTSD. Part of that time I was working as an osteopath. And then I started coaching, and I've done mental health coaching and relationship coaching. And I take a spiritual approach to the work. And my life experience includes the trauma of being sent to boarding school at the age of 11. I survived a bereavement by suicide when I was 20, and it was my boyfriend who took his life 2 days after my 20th birthday. I've been through quite a few relationships which did not work out. The one I'm in now is working out. And I survived probably I'd say between 15 and 20 years of emotional abuse with my ex. So my partner and I are kind of figuring it out together. And I just, in the last, year and a half, I started training to work with couples. So why this particular topic? Well, a relationship built on anxiety will fall. It may last till you die, but it won't be a good relationship. And one built on trust will thrive. And the problem is, how do we move from that anxiety to trust? And that can be really challenging. So part of the problem is the kinds of things that our anxiety causes us to do. So these are just a few things. It's not everything, but we could have anxiety about the conflict itself, particularly people who are raised in families where their parents fought a lot, may be quite kind of allergic to conflict and try to avoid it at all costs. There's a fear of causing pain to your partner, where you feel like if you do or say certain things, your partner's going to be upset. There's anxious thinking about what your partner's thinking about you. And there's obviously anxiety about being rejected or abandoned, or in certain cases, abused, which I haven't put on my list. And some of the things that people do because of anxiety is the classic thing of walking on eggshells, not saying what you're thinking. So holding it all back, not voicing your needs, and that constant state of nervous system activation, which is really debilitating, and can cause all sorts of health problems. which is what I encountered when I worked as an osteopath, because I was working with people with chronic fatigue syndrome, and there was almost always a lot of anxiety in their experience. So kind of a brief overview of the natural head anxiety, which the slide is not coming up. I do apologize for this. There we go. So the first thing to say is that anxiety is a natural function of being human. So it's something that we need in any society, whether you're a hunter-gatherer, somewhere in between, or living in a modern urban community. It's helpful. It's necessary for survival. So for instance, if I'm walking home late, I mean, we're all women in this room, so walking home late at night, we would be anxious. And if we weren't anxious, we might walk into some trouble. So you're kind of on the alert, making sure there's no dodgy guy coming towards you, crossing the road and so on. That anxiety is actually quite helpful. But it's how anxiety then grows from that. And those patterns of anxiety, they're kind of specific to each person, and they start in childhood and they're shaped by our childhood experiences. And they become part of our survival program. So the idea of a survival program is that during childhood, every child has some challenges to face, some worse than others. And we develop a survival program to keep us safe in childhood. And we bring it with us, probably mostly unconsciously, into adulthood. It's only when we become conscious of it that we can start to change it. And one of the things that can develop in childhood is an anxious attachment style, where we have a lot of anxiety about our relationships and about abandonment. I am sorry, I have just had Zoom through a window in front of my face. Can you still see my slides, or are you seeing a Zoom window?
You see the slides.
Thank you, Celia. So the other thing I would say about this is that sometimes we get hijacked by our own anxiety. So it's a sort of self-feeding system. And this is one of the things I encountered with my patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, was that they had anxiety about being anxious, which led to panic attacks. So I would definitely say that anxiety is a self-feeding system, and you kind of have to break that loop. So what are the mistakes we make? Some people try and push it away, try to avoid feeling the anxiety, and commonly use alcohol or drugs or gambling or gaming or porn. I mean, the list is, or, retail therapy. Gabor Mate, the famous trauma therapist, is famous for buying CDs as a way of handling his anxiety. Or working long hours. And then for some of us, it's more about thinking and thinking and thinking about it. We ask all those what if questions. What will happen if this? What will happen if that? And my sister referred to it as a sort of a vortex of what ifs, which I quite like that expression. That's where we get caught about anxiety sometimes. And then for some of us, it's about blaming others, about blaming our feelings on other people, on ourselves, on our trauma, on our past. And then the final thing on this slide is the solutions that we seek outside of ourselves, like meditation, yoga, and therapy. Now, I am not saying those are bad things. I'm not saying it's not a good idea to use those things if you suffer with anxiety, but I would say that to some extent they can just be a bit of a sticking plaster. And they enable us to function in spite of the fact that anxiety is still there. It's just helping us to manage it, but it's not transforming it. So I want to talk about the process of transformation. And this is this pyramid thing I borrowed from a mentor. It used to be 5 levels, and they've reduced it to 3, which is quite nice. So the bottom level is what I guess a lot of people would call God. I call it the divine or universal consciousness normally when I'm talking about it. And it's the basis of the whole model is that we're not separate from the divine, we're part of it. And the Vietnamese late great Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Zen master, said, enlightenment is when the wave realizes it is the ocean. So we are all parts of that ocean, if you like. So the middle layer is that part of that ocean, which is you. So you can call it your soul or your true self or the uniqueness that makes you who you are. And on the top layer is the part of you that's been created by that inner divinity, which you've created during your life, which is your ego or your identity, your personality. So that survival program that I talked about earlier is part of that. So the transformation, or whatever transformation it might be, happens from that bottom layer. So from down, now I have lost my mouse. From down the bottom layer here, that powers that transformation. And it comes through your true self. And that's why I say that things coming from outside, the yoga and meditation, is more of a sticking plaster, because if you really want to transform yourself, it comes from the inside out. So, but nonetheless, there are things you can do straight away. As you kind of, but transformation doesn't happen. Well, sometimes transformation does happen overnight, but generally speaking, it does not. And there are things you can do to make it easier to go through. It's a bit like taking antidepressants when you get yourself to a place where you can actually start to change. You see, I mean, if you're into that kind of thing. So the first thing I'd say is to lean into your anxiety and begin to recognize when it's your servant and when it's got its sticky hands on the steering wheel, because it should not be your master, it should be your servant. It should be the anxiety that you feel when you're walking home late at night, not the anxiety you feel when somebody walks in, when you hear that person's key in the door. That person hopefully being your other half, not some random stranger. So bring yourself to presence. So bring yourself to what is happening right here, right now. Be present to that. And look out for the stories that you're telling yourself. And ask yourself, is this necessarily true? And in most cases, it won't be. And I know for me, what I have tended to do is I don't believe anything I tell myself anymore. I don't assume anything I think is true, because in most cases it probably isn't, particularly if I've got that anxious feeling in my body. And above all, practice self-compassion. And remember to remind yourself that you are so much more than just your personality, and that your true self is a boundless source of wisdom, which will help you to step back from anxiety. So when I'm working with clients, I use something I call the heart bridge method. And I don't know whether you can see the small text here. It may be, is it okay? Oh, brilliant. Okay. So the kind of thing I'm trying to do all the time is to remind them that they're not just their little personality, that they are this part of this huge ocean, this huge divine ocean. And that we keep coming back to that over and over again. And then we work on self-care, self-compassion, and particularly curiosity, because people are so prone to judging themselves and judging others. And it's always like, okay, so we'll inject some curiosity into that and see where that leads us. And then for them to become mindful of the old programs that they're still playing out as adults, even though they were suited to them when they were children. But they're usually not very effective in relationships. In fact, they're never effective in relationships. And that could be either sort of hiding away because I'm so anxious about what will happen if I speak out, or it could be about coming in really strong to try and overpower the other person's point of view or whatever. So then you're noticing how your patterns, those old programs, are contributing to the problems in your relationship. And at the same time, and this doesn't really go in a circle. These things happen together, but it's quite hard to represent that on a blank piece of paper. But you're going to befriend your survival personality, because that was your inner wisdom that created those patterns as a child to keep you safe. So you don't want to say, oh, it's useless, go away. It's more like, that's been brilliant, thank you. And let's see what we can do with that now. And then finally, you reinvent yourself. And when I say reinvent yourself, it's that process of transformation, but it's also partly just practice. So like when I'm working with couples, actually and also one-to-one, I teach my clients relational mindfulness, where when they're about to do something which is a bit of an old knee-jerk reaction to things, I get them to take a breath and pause and just ask themselves, is this going to make things better? Is it going to make it worse? How is it going to impact on my relationship? And so then you come back to the true self thing again, because you're powering all from the inside out, as it were. So I've got some testimonials. The first one is from Matthew, who I've been working with quite recently, actually. He came to see me, I think, in November, December last year, and we're still working together. He says, I came to see Sorrel following some anger issues I was having after a bereavement. And the work that Sorrel has done with me has been transformative, to say the least. I feel much calmer, in a considerably better place, and certainly less angry than I ever did prior to the work that I started with Sorrel. Sorrel has an ability to hold a reflective space for you, asking just the right amount of questions that encourage reflectivity and the opportunity to adjust your feelings or behavior accordingly. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend spending some time with Sorrel. And then Suzanne, who came with her husband, but she came with a session on her own first of all. After one session with Sorrel, I felt energized. I had articulated the things that bothered me most and become determined to fix them. I booked a second session with my partner and found we were in total agreement about a way forward. A huge impact in minimal time, and the process was almost entirely positive. I had feared that couples counselling would be painful, embarrassing, and infuriating, but Sorrel has the ability to keep conversations focused on a positive outcome. I was impressed and would recommend her to anyone seeking clarity. The third one is quite long. It's from a couple I worked with last year, and I'm not going to read it out to you because I think it's going to get boring. But it is about their moving from being unable to live in the same house, even in the same country, to getting engaged and planning a family. So that was a huge transformation. Um, so at the moment, I have a program focused on anxiety in relationships, which I've called From Fractured to Flourishing. And it's for you if you're experiencing a lot of anxiety about your relationship and you're finding it difficult to get your needs met because you're afraid to speak up. And so during the program, I will support you as you first explore the origins of the anxiety, how it started, why it started, and then to connect with your innate wisdom, that true self part of you, as a means of transforming it and finding new ways of communicating with your partner without fear. So that brings us back to relational mindfulness. And it's for anybody experiencing conflict in their relationship, or actually that tendency to avoid conflict at all costs. But not really anyone who's right at the point of divorce. I think that's a different kind of approach needed there. And I can work with a couple, and I can work one-to-one with one partner, because even if you are working with me one-to-one, the fact that you will change will have an impact on your partner, and they will change too, because it's like a system. If you change one part of the system, the other parts change. But you must be willing to take responsibility for your own shit. That's really important. And I'm particularly focusing on people between the ages of 30 to 55, which is quite broad. So it could be people who are thinking about starting a family, and it could be people who've got children who are kind of about to leave home or have just recently left home. And because of my boarding school experience, I particularly look for people who went to boarding school, because it's a very particular kind of trauma. And preferably in a marriage, either married or in a long-term relationship. I'm not particularly interested. I'm not going to work with somebody who's just starting out in a new relationship. It's not suitable for that. And they could be a business owner or in a senior position at work, but that's not necessary. And preferably intelligent. It's nice to work with people who are intelligent and ambitious and possibly neurodivergent. And how does it work? So I take you through a process to enable you to reconnect with your true self. So that first thing at the top of my heart bridge thingy. And you'll get familiar with what your anxieties are, because sometimes we're not even really that aware of what they are. We have to start uncovering them. And you identify where the anxiety is sabotaging your relationship. and the childhood origins of those particular anxieties, and then how you could transform the anxiety from being your master to make it your servant. And you'll begin to play with the possibility that you can dispense with it. A lot of the anxiety that's been present in your relationship. And I will teach you a relational mindfulness so that you can communicate with your partner without anxiety getting the upper hand. And these are my contact details. I will pop them in the chat in case you are interested in talking to me. And I'm now going to stop sharing. Has anybody got any questions?